All right, just so folks are aware, this is being recorded and will make its way to the RCPP NRCS website, but may take a few weeks for that to happen. Good afternoon. My name is Kari Cohen. I'm the project's branch chief here at the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and it's my team here at our national headquarters that has national responsibility for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We're here today to talk about an exciting new elements in the RCPP program. Back on August 15th, Secretary Vilsack announced several new nutrient management initiatives, and as part of that, he announced the special funding announcement for RCPP that we're calling RCPP Grants for Nutrient Management. So I see on the line today, we've got a mix of some NRCS folks. We've got quite a few folks external to the agency as well, potential applicants maybe. What we're going to do today is I'm going to walk through the highlights of the funding announcement that is available on grants.gov. I'm not going to go into great detail today because there's so much information there in the funding announcement, but I will hit the highlights, talk about how this differs from some other RCPP funding opportunities, some of the constraints around the funding opportunity, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end to visit with your questions. So I'm going to go through all the slides. There's 28 of them. You can submit questions in the chat box as I'm going along. And then at the end, we can also open up the floor to some verbal questions. And when we get there, we'll talk about how to do that. All right, so we're going to just dive in here. Hopefully you can see my slides. This first slide is just an overview slide of RCPP overall. Of course, RCPP, is the goal of the program is to help producers and landowners across the nation both protect working ag lands and address natural resource concerns in a variety of ways. We do that by working hand in hand with our partners to co-invest in these conservation activities that we're trying to put on the landscape at a regional scale. And we do it on eligible lands, and these eligible lands are dictated to us by the Farm Bill statute for RCPP, as you can see there. And then the duration of these projects are typically 5 years. The Farm Bill, the current Farm Bill, allows for 1 year no-cost extensions, but typically RCPP projects start anyway at 5 years in length. So why are partners, what is this? What is it about RCPP that attracts partners, and why would a partner think about applying to RCPP? Well, for a few reasons. One is to target our Farm Bill funding, and this is Farm Bill funding that the partner that's working in any particular region on any particular issue can target our funding for specific resource concerns that the partner is interested in. And you can do it within a specific geographic area. And in some cases, you can even target it to specific partners or landowners. And basically, you can help those producers and landowners work on natural resource concerns that are of mutual interest to both NRCS and you, the partner. And then, of course, we're always interested in partners that can bring their own contributions, their staff, their capacity, their financial assistance to sort of complement our NRCS funding. So, RCPP grants. We are authorized as an agency or as a department to use grants under RCPP through the 2018 Farm Bill. We haven't done that yet. So this is the first time under the 2018 Farm Bill that we will be using grant agreements, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But basically, under this funding announcement, it is a special funding announcement with using, for what without finding a better term, this is leftover money that's available here. So it's up to $40 million, and the most that we can make is 7 awards. The current Farm Bill allows us to make up to 15 what it's called alternative funding arrangements or grants in any given fiscal year. And just recently, we announced 8 alternative funding arrangement awards for FY22. So we've got 7 left that we can make here in this fiscal year, or at least using this fiscal year's money. And there's $40 million available. As I said, these awards will be made using grant agreements, which the agency uses in a variety of different ways. And this is different than the way that we've been administering our alternative funding arrangements under the 2018 Farm Bill to date. Just like all of our RCPP projects, NRCS state offices will manage these awards, and they'll do it sort of alongside the Grants and Agreements Division at the FPAC Business Center, which is our sister agency here. Grants and Agreements Division manages all of our cooperative agreements, all of our grant agreements. And so they will certainly be helping us administer this new grant component for RCPP. And unlike the rest of RCPP to date under the 2018 Farm Bill, 2 CFR 200, which is the federal financial award regulation, fully applies to these awards. Few other things about these projects. The lead partner is responsible for working directly with producers to implement these conservation activities under these awards. The lead partner is also responsible for delivering most of the technical assistance to support implementation. NRCSTA support is really limited to some non-delegable tasks that we have as a federal agency. And there's some examples are given here. We have to be able to confirm the eligibility of producers on land to participate in the program. We have to verify whether producers meet the adjusted gross income limits of the Farm Bill, and also that they're in compliance with NEPA. The activities that are being carried out are in compliance with NEPA, and that the producers are in compliance with both the highly erodible lands and the wetlands compliance provisions of the Farm Bill. Some of the limitations under this funding announcement, with the RCPP, we can do lots of different types of conservation activities, including easements and watershed or public works type of activities. However, this NFO, we are limited to just land management and rental activities. We are not going to allow any easements or watershed public work structures to be built under this funding announcement. It's going to take us a little while to figure out how to incorporate easements and watershed structures and watershed projects into a grant type of award. And we're working on that now for future iterations of RCPP grants. But for the purposes of this funding announcement, it's only land management and rental activities. And consistent with the Secretary's announcement, any project that we make an award under this announcement has to be focused on nutrient management. So effectively, partners are limited to projects that are focused on the NRCS 590 conservation practice standard, which is our nutrient management standard, and any other practices that impact nutrient management out there on the landscape. The final limitation is that this funding is available only in our critical conservation area fund pool. For those of you that know RCPP, we have 2 fund pools. One is the state multi-state pool, and the other is the critical conservation area fund pool. And so this money is only able to be spent in that CCA fund pool. And because it's focused only on nutrient management, it's limited to CCAs that have water quality as a priority resource concern. So whenever applicants submit a proposal to the CCA fund pool, it has to address one of the priority resource concerns of that CCA. And all of our CCAs, with the exception of one, have water quality as a priority resource concern. And that one is the prairie grasslands CCA. So we will not be accepting any proposals in those states that are part of the prairie grasslands or in that region of the prairie grasslands. I've got here a map of our critical conservation areas. All this information is in the NFO itself if you're looking for detailed information, but the prairie grasslands region is this big hashed one in the middle of the country in the plain states. It's kind of an orange hashed blob. That's the one that is not eligible for this particular funding announcement. But all the other blobs that you see here, the colored blobs, are eligible. But I will note that if you're doing, for example, looking to do work in Nevada, the work in Nevada has to be within the confines of either this purple blob down here in the southeastern part of Nevada or in the very northwest corner of Nevada in the brown blob. The work has to be carried out within some of these colored areas to be eligible. Just a little bit about general information about who's eligible to apply as a lead partner for RCPP. This is the laundry list that comes out of our statute, pretty much verbatim. It's all the folks that can apply to RCPP writ large. And I won't go through all these. It's in the funding announcement if you are interested in looking at this in detail. All right, we talked about RCPP being sort of a mix of NRCS funded activities and also partner contributions. The statute for RCPP sets the expectation that partners are going to provide a significant portion of the overall costs of the project. We know that partners can bring contributions that complement what NRCS can do, can bring different types of activities. You can do outreach to partners. You can do economic analyses of producer activities. You could do water quality monitoring, all sorts of things that NRCS funding may not be able to pay for. And so we certainly are still looking for those contributions, even though this is a grant opportunity, to come in and be a significant part of the overall cost of the project. We did walk away a little bit from the one-to-one goal that we've always had in RCPP in this particular funding announcement, but we do still have the contributions as a critical part of the evaluation criteria for proposals that come in. Contributions, of course, can be cash or in kind. They can come from third parties that are not one of these eligible partners that are listed here. And the unique thing about RCPP here is that contributions from federal agencies can count, but USDA agency funding, of course, cannot. That was a policy decision that has been made. So how can this RCPP funding for these grants be used? Well, we typically talk about two different types of funding assistance. One is financial assistance. Basically, this is money that's going out on the ground to help landowners, in this case, put nutrient management activities directly on the ground. Then there's technical assistance, and this is the man or woman power that's out there helping producers or landowners put those activities on the ground. So these are things like practice design, conservation planning, installation, and checkout. Checkout means you're effectively making sure that the producer or landowner did what they said they were going to do as part of the practice. So if you're familiar with RCPP, to date under the 2018 Farm Bill, we've been using different types of technical assistance terms. One is enhancement technical assistance, the other is implementation technical assistance. We've done away with those distinctions for the purpose of RCPP grants, and just said overall, the request from partners for technical assistance funding cannot exceed 25% of the overall ask. Again, we still want RCPP to fundamentally be an on-the-ground conservation program, and that's why 75% of the funds at least have to go out on the ground. But again, we're doing away with those TA distinctions and just lumping everything into this 25% TA bucket. TA funding as under all other projects for the 2018 Farm Bill can also be used for project support activities, to manage the project, to interface with NRCS, to write reports, to do producer outreach, those sorts of things. All that can be included in that 25% bucket. This is really important to understand, and we have some information on this in the NFO, that there's basically two ways to think about structuring an RCPP grant project for nutrient management. One is where the lead partner sort of acts as a contract manager. So they're writing contracts directly with producers or landowners who are going to in turn implement the conservation activities using any necessary TA and FA that's provided by the lead partner. So the lead partner is, let's say, a state agency. As an example, they're literally going to be writing contracts and providing funding to producers and landowners to do the work. The second way that a partner can structure a project under this NFO is where the awardee sort of acts as a contractor or service provider, where you've got eligible landowners and producers, you've got their land, but the lead partner is going to maybe work with other partners or even third-party contractors to actually carry out the conservation activities that would benefit those eligible producers and their lands. So under this type of approach, no funding would actually go directly to a producer or landowner. The work would all be done by the lead partner or collection of partners or third parties, again, to benefit those eligible lands and those eligible producers or landowners. two distinctly different ways to think about these types of projects, and you'll definitely want to explain in your proposal which one of these structures you are planning to carry out. All right, eligible lands, again, this comes from the statute and our regulation. It's got to be private or tribal agricultural land, non-industrial private forest land, or associated land. And all of this detail is included in the funding announcement, so I won't get into great detail here, but nothing has changed from RCPP under the 2018 Farm Bill here for this funding opportunity. Okay, I mentioned earlier that part of what NRCS has to do with our technical assistance for these projects is that we have to verify that any producer that's part of these projects is eligible to be a part of the project. And so some of those things that we have to do is we have to ensure that the producers are eligible for USDA payments. So they have to be in FSA's system. It's a form that has to be completed and in the system. They have to be in compliance with the HEL and wetlands. I mentioned that earlier, and they must be in compliance with the adjusted gross income provision, although there are opportunities to waive that, and all that information is in the NFO as well. Just a reminder down here at the bottom that proposals, when they're submitted, they don't have to have particular producers or landowners in mind that they're going to participate in the project. But all of that will be done through the course of the 5-year project once producers that are going to participate are identified. Just want to reiterate here that land management and rental activities are the only activities available under this funding announcement. You'll see there that our easements and watershed project authorities are crossed out for this particular grant opportunity. Again, future grant opportunities, we're exploring how to fold those back in to grant type of projects, but at the current time, it's just land management and rental. I mentioned NEPA earlier. This is another critical thing for folks to understand. People think that they're going to get a grant and they're going to go off and do these activities with minimal oversight from the granting agency. And by and large, that is true. But this is one of those things that's a little bit awkward, and it's something we can't get away from when we're funding activities that are putting conservation on the ground disturbing activities. We've got to be in compliance with NEPA, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and also Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. We can't delegate that responsibility to an awardee or a grantee. As a federal agency, we have to be the one to ensure that all these activities are in compliance. I mentioned earlier some of our conservation practice standards, particularly 590, our nutrient management standard. Those conservation practice standards really form the basis of the majority of what we do out there on the landscape for land improvement and land management, and they're really critical to understand in the context of NEPA. If partners that are applying to this funding opportunity want to engage with producers to do something other than implement conservation practices or systems to our standards, and that's a very important thing. We have explicit conservation practice standards. They're written down. They're easily accessible on our website. The reason why we can, generally speaking, comply with NEPA fairly in a fairly streamlined way is because we have these categorical exclusions based on our conservation practices and systems that we put out on the landscape. Again, if partners are trying to do something that's not consistent with our conservation practice standards, there might have to be further NEPA analysis required at the project level. And this may include an environmental assessment, otherwise known as an EA, or potentially a more in-depth environmental impact statement. If as an applicant, upfront that you're going to want to do something that doesn't exactly comport with our NRCS practice standards, the time and the cost that it takes to do an environmental assessment or EIS needs to be baked into your proposal. It could take 6 months to a year, but it may be something that benefits you for sure, so that you can ensure that the practices or whatever activities you want to do with producers on the landscape are ultimately going to be allowed. So very important to understand this NEPA need. And if you have any questions, certainly you can let us know. All right, let's talk a little bit about how to actually apply. As I mentioned, the NFO is posted on grants.gov. You can see the opportunity number there. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but if you go to grants.gov and you type RCPP or Regional Conservation Partnership Program into the search box, you will find it. Applications for this opportunity are submitted through grants.gov, and if you have trouble with grants.gov, you can buzz any of the number or email there. And proposals for this opportunity are due September 22nd. Very important to understand that. Okay, let's see. This is a little bit more information about grants.gov. You have to have a UEI, which is this unique identifier, and register in sam.gov. You've got to register with grants.gov, all that good stuff. And you can see here our big yellow arrow pointing to the apply box. That will tell you how to do that in grants.gov. Again, there's a lot of information about how to apply and what's got to be in a proposal. Here's a summary, but all the detailed information about what is a cover page and what needs to be included, what is a project management plan, what is an SF424, all of that is included in the grants.gov package and in the NFO. So just encourage folks to pay particular attention to that as you're applying. How are proposals evaluated? It's laid out in the NFO. The four criteria that we have are consistent and have been pretty much since the beginning of the 2018 Farm Bill. We're looking for projects that make an impact out there on the landscape, that have a compelling need and are going to address a resource concern in a confined geographic area. We're interested in those partner contributions, as we said. What are partners bringing to the table that are going to complement what we can do through NRCS funding? Innovation's a key part of RCPP. Why are folks looking to use RCPP versus doing something through EQIP or other Farm Bill programs? And then finally, partnership and project management. It's really key that our lead partners have the experience and the capacity to be able to implement a project like this, especially one where the lead partner is going to be responsible for most of the financial and technical assistance. A little bit more information about the budget tables, and all this information again is in the appendices of the NFO. It can get a little bit weedy here, but if you're planning to make payments to producers, and I mentioned that earlier, that's one of the possible structures for these grant projects. Those should go under contractual, the contractual line in your budget table. And the same is true if you're having third-party contractors perform work. For example, if you're hiring an engineering firm or something like that. If you have a contributing partner that is going to be doing, for example, water quality monitoring, but they're an eligible partner under that list of RCPP partners, those subawards should go under the other category. Again, this is all sort of laid out in the NFO and the appendices in the budget narrative guidance, as you can see here at the bottom. One thing that's important to remember if you've applied to RCPP previously under the 2018 Farm Bill, that no NRCS funding should be included in your budget. We're going to fund all those NRCS tasks, the producer compliance checks and NEPA compliance checks outside of the project funding, so you do not have to worry about that. Second, again, technical assistance requests cannot exceed 25% of your total request. We're going to have a single agreement with a lead partner. That's the way these grants work, right? Every grant has a single awardee. And then if the lead partner wants to turn around and have others do some of the work under the project, they can go ahead and do that, either making payments to producers, you can have contracts with third-party contractors, or subawards to contributing partners. Just like with all 2018 Farm Bill RCPP awards, NRCS is prohibited from paying for the administrative costs of partners. This is in the statute. It hasn't changed just because we're going to grants, and there's a lot of information about this in the NFO. Encourage you to take a look at that in some detail. Just a quick word or two here on project outcomes. This is true of all 2018 Farm Bill projects for RCPP. Partners are required to report on the conservation or environmental outcomes of their projects, which means not just how many acres of nutrient management did you put on the ground, how many practices did you implement with producers, but really what was the outcome of that? What's the water quality improvement, for example? And then to the extent possible, what were the economic and social benefits or outcomes of your project? There's information about this on our website. We've got an outcomes guide for partners. Just encourage folks to take a look at that because this is a requirement of lead partners or awardees under these projects. A little bit more about that. I did just mention it's required for all projects. The economic and social outcome reporting is optional. And, you know, there's going to be regular reporting required for these projects. And basically, whenever a progress report is submitted, we need to see some progress on how, you know, partners are working on this outcome reporting that ultimately will be reported in the final report. Let's talk a little bit about historically underserved producers. This is a term of art here at USDA that encompasses a few different producer groups, including beginning, veteran, socially disadvantaged, and limited resource producers. In the NFO, you'll get links and to those what the definition of those different producer groups are. Similar to lots of NRCS programs, there's definitely a focus on providing financial and technical assistance to historically underserved producers in our programs. And so it says right there in the NFO that we intend to award a significant amount of available funding to projects that benefit HU producers. We certainly include or encourage all applicants to include historically underserved producers in their projects. And when the projects come in and are submitted, the proposals, each proposal gets what we call an HU index rating. That's, you know, basically you get higher points if your project has a substantive plan to include HU partners and producers in your project. So just want to point that out and encourage folks to include historically underserved producers and also partners that work with historically underserved producers in your projects. Very quickly, what happens after selection is made? Those folks that are selected as grantees, the lead state, you know, where your project will be carried out will be the one that coordinates the negotiation of your grant agreement, along with our friends again at the Grants and Agreements Division. All these grant agreements will be managed using EasyFed Grants, which is where folks are familiar, you know, managing grant agreements with USDA. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be regular progress and financial reporting similar to any grant, in addition to a final report submission. All right, I barreled through that pretty quickly. There is a couple links here, but there's a lot of information again in the NFO on how to apply. There's a list of state RCPP coordinators. They're on the RCPP national website. We have a how to apply page. I encourage you to go to check that out. Our state RCPP coordinators are often the first and best line of communication for folks that are interested in submitting a proposal to RCPP. Because all of our projects are managed out there at the state level, they're often the ones that know things best. So we encourage folks to go to those state RCPP coordinators. We also have a national RCPP inbox. You can see it there, rcpp@usda.gov. And we're happy to answer any questions that folks may have as well. So with that, I think I will just stop there and open it up to questions. And I do realize you may have seen me hesitate earlier. I'm not sure why we got that September 22nd due date in the slides, but that was obviously horribly wrong. I'm going to go back here. Yeah, I was even highlighted in yellow. I think I meant to go back and fix that. But the due date for these proposals is October 31st, Halloween. Pretty scary. But just want to note that this was an error in the slides, and we'll make sure that we get that corrected on the slide deck. But everyone out there, just please note that these submissions are due October 31st, not September 22nd. Okay, Let's see here. I'm gonna see if we have any questions in the chat. Russell, my trusty assistant, maybe we can ask you to moderate what's happening in the chat here. And then also, if you have a question that you'd like to ask verbally, feel free to raise your hand here in Teams. If you go up to the reactions little tab there at the top of the screen, you have the opportunity to click on the little raised hand, and then we can unlock your microphone and you can ask a verbal question. But until we see others or folks that have verbal questions, Russell, maybe you can see if you have any chat box questions.
Sure, will do, Kari. I'll keep monitoring those that raise your hand, so feel free to join the queue if you'd like to do a verbal question, but we'll start with the chat questions. The first coming from Aubrey asking, are there any limitations to what supplies can be purchased with grant funds?
Kari,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I take this one?
Yes, you can, so.
There are some limitations as to what can be purchased with RCPP grant funds, and they come from both the RCPP side and the 2 CFR 230 side. 2 CFR 230, of course, addresses the cost principles and the eligibility requirements. It basically says that things have to be reasonable cost and related to the project. RCPP also says that they cannot be administrative. So those will be the two sets of limits that kick in on supplies. Basically, eligible cost for the project purpose is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, and Aubrey, if you have specific questions about specific supplies, you can shoot those our way once you sort out your proposal, and we can try to help with that. And sometimes we need to again engage with our grants and agreements division colleagues who are really the experts on a lot of 2 CFR 200 stuff. But Russell, next question.
Next question comes from Maggie. Is there a percentage or specific amount of the available funding that is intended to be awarded to projects that prioritize serving historically underserved producers?
Thanks for that question, Maggie. There is not listed in the NFO a specific amount or percentage that we're looking to provide to historically underserved producers. We do use that phrase, a substantive amount or a sizable amount or significant amount, something like that. We specifically did not put a hard percentage or specific amount in there. But again, this is something that our leadership is absolutely intent on. It's something that, again, across the board of all of our programs, we're working hard to ensure that more and more of our funding is going to historically underserved producers, which again is a broad group of producers, has all those different producer groups in it. But certainly, again, just want to encourage folks to the extent that your geographies and projects allow, try to find partners that have experience and trusted relationships with those historically underserved producers and try to get them involved in your projects. There's no reason that if you're doing a nutrient management project, historically underserved producers are out there doing the same sorts of nutrient management things that other producers are. So just encourage folks to try and broaden your partnerships and the scope of the types of producers that you're trying to reach, and it will only benefit you when it comes time for us to make decisions. All right, Russell, go ahead.
Thank you, Kari. I'll cover the next question from Tom, which is, when will a recording of this presentation be available? So for all folks from NRCS that are joining the call, the presentation will be immediately available within the chat. We are also going to post it to the NRCS How to Apply website. However, that may take a few weeks before you see it on that website, as there's a few technical hurdles we have to overcome that take a few weeks to process. And the following question is from Maggie. Is this grant in lieu of the RCPP alternative funding arrangements, or do you expect to release an AFA announcement in the near future as well?
Hey, Maggie's lighting up our chat box. Good question, Maggie. So this, again, this special funding opportunity is using fiscal year 22 money. We had previously made an AFA or alternative funding arrangement funding announcement for FY22, and we actually made, again, 8 AFA awards earlier this month. So this is all using fiscal year 22 money. Fiscal year 22 ends at the end of September, and then we'll be rolling over into FY23. And so I would expect a future AFA or grants announcement for FY23 to occur. You may have seen the news that RCPP is also the beneficiary of quite a influx of funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're taking a close look at that money as well. Slated to receive an additional $250 million in FY23, above and beyond the $300 million that the Farm Bill provides. And so, yes, there will be future AFA or grants announcements in FY23.
Thank you, Kari. Next question comes from Krisha. It says, will this be promoted on Gov Delivery news release? And I can cover this question. We are working with our colleagues in public affairs to get this promoted through a few different social media routes, which will include Gov Delivery and hopefully some tweets and press releases on the website. It may get rolled in with a few other parallel similar NFOs that are also focused on nutrient management, but we are working to get this NFO further amplified and out there.
Thank you. And I'll just one quick follow up on my response to Maggie about future funding opportunities. Again, this funding opportunity is pretty limited. It's limited to the critical conservation areas, and it's also limited to nutrient management activities that are land management and rental only. As I said earlier, we are working behind the scenes here to try to figure out how to include easements and watershed activities in future grant opportunities. So if you're an organization that is more easement oriented, there will be opportunities in the future to engage with RCPP grants or AFAs, but it's just not this one. Okay, I don't see, I think, Russell, any more questions in the chat box, and I don't think I see any raised hands. Am I incorrect on that?
That is correct, Kari. I'm not seeing anything in the chat box. So folks, feel free to use the reactions in the top right bar to raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted for a verbal question, or type your chat in the chat box at any time.
Give everyone just another few seconds here. I'll take a sip of water. Okay, but I'm not seeing any more questions. So I think we'll call it a day. Really want to thank everyone. I think at peak we had about 106 participants, which is great on relatively short notice here. So thanks so much. We look forward to your proposals. Again, reach out to the national inbox, rcpp@usda.gov. You can reach out to your state RCPP coordinator. And thanks so much for your interest in RCPP. Take care.